Hello, I'm Dr. Matt Capp from Capitalize Education, and in this video we're going to explore the next steps in implementing the Capitalize Education model for implementing universal design for learning within classrooms. In the last video we explored how to deconstruct the approved curriculum to ensure that it is an inclusive curriculum, because in the Universal Design for Learning framework, the learning goal taken from the approved curriculum is not tied to a specific way of demonstrating it unless explicitly stated in the curriculum. This is why it's really important to deconstruct the curriculum collaboratively with your colleagues. Otherwise, we end up with different interpretations of what students are required to do. In this next video, we're going to explore the steps of identifying the strengths and functional impacts for the students in our whole entire class. Because Universal Design for Learning at that Tier 1 support is thinking about all the learners in our classrooms, not thinking about individual students or students as individuals at the moment, because that moves into the differentiated instruction model. So we're going to have a look at how we can start to think about our class and our students in terms of what are their strengths and functional impacts for all the learners in our classroom. To do this, we use a simple framework that we've designed. So in step 3 of the model, we use this framework to think about what are the common characteristics of our learners in our classroom. So we think about our learners and what we see within our room and within our classrooms, and what are those common characteristics. In this example, different levels of reading comprehension, different levels of engagement, and English is not the first language of many of the students within my classroom. So we've identified the common characteristics of our learners, but we need to go beyond these common characteristics. We now need to delve down into the strengths of our students and the functional impacts or the barriers to the learning process. We start with strengths because humans have a tendency towards negativity bias, and if we start with the functional impacts or barriers, we generally end up in a cycle of negativity. So we think first about the strengths of our learners in terms of those common characteristics. Sometimes there aren't, but we think about what are the strengths of those kids in our class, what do they bring to that table that we could use to leverage to access the learning process. Once we've identified students' strengths, we can start to think about what are their barriers to the learning process. Now that we've identified the strengths of our learners and the barriers to the learning process of our learners, we can start to think about the nationally consistent collection of data framework for students with disability within our classes, and how we could identify to the federal government with that we know our students' strengths and functional impacts. One simple way of doing that is to include the initials of our students with disability into this planning framework. It shows the federal government that we know our learners, we know their strengths, and we know their functional impacts or barriers to the learning process. If you have a look at this example here, the first 2 rows have initials of students with disability. The third doesn't. The reason the third doesn't is because students from an EALD background are not included in the nationally consistent collection of data. Now that we've identified the strengths and functional impacts for all of our learners within our classroom, we can go to the UDL framework to identify potential strategies that we can use to support our students to leverage their strengths and overcome their barriers to the learning process. The UDL framework is a problem-solving tool. It's not a set of strategies, it's a way of thinking about how we can overcome those barriers to the learning process. So the green column is the idea of Principle 1, that we engage kids in the learning process in multiple ways. The purple column, Principle 2, is the idea that when I'm modeling and scaffolding the content descriptors in the Australian curriculum, I do it in multiple ways. And the blue column is Principle 3, is the idea that when students are demonstrating evidence of learning against the achievement standards in the Australian curriculum, they do it in multiple ways. And so we can use this problem-solving tool to think about or identify potential strategies that we could use to support or leverage our students' strength and support our students to overcome their barriers to the learning process. Now that we've looked at the UDL framework and we've thought about our students' strengths and thought about our students' barriers to the learning process, we can problem solve or identify some potential strategies that we could implement in our Tier 1 or good first teaching level to support our learners. If we have a look at the common characteristics of our learners, our student strength and then functional impact, and then problem solve around potential strategies we can use within our classroom, we can start to see that there are common strategies that would be more useful to support our learners. So we can implement those within our classroom at that tier 1 level. And by taking this approach, we're taking a universal design for learning approach, because universal design for learning is a proactive approach to inclusion. Thank you for watching this video. In the next video, we're going to explore how we can take this information and put it into the lesson planning process using the explicit instruction model.